This lawsuit that was filed this morning against the Archdiocese of St. Paul-Minneapolis and the Diocese of Winona pertains to the repeated abuse and the sordid saga of cover-up by both dioceses of the abuse by Tom Adamson. But the suit seeks something much more than accountability and a day in court. It seeks to require and demand that the Archdiocese of St. Paul and Minneapolis and the Diocese of Winona, both the Archbishop here and the Bishop in Winona, come clean and come forth with the list of credibly accused offenders that they have and continue to hold secret. So this suit is designed to not only allow a reckoning for the crimes and the cover-up of the past, but designed first to expose the offenders and the names of the offenders that only the Archbishop and the Bishop and their lieutenants know, and the public don't. So this suit and this courageous action taken today by this survivor and now permitted in Minnesota is an opportunity for us to sound the alarm and for us to require legally them to come forth with a list of those that they know have credibly been accused of sexual abuse of minors, whose names the community does not know. Therefore, we don't know where these offenders are, where they're working, where they're living, and what they're doing, and thus remain a grave peril to our children. And so we applaud this courageous survivor for his desire to take this first action, and of course the legislature and the governor for giving him and us a chance to demand exposure and disclosure of the identities of the offenders so that the kids in our community and across Minnesota can be better protected. And as long as these secrets are held by the bishops in Minnesota and the Archbishop and the Bishop in Winona and the others like it, our kids remain at grave peril because we do not know who those offenders are, and they do. In 2004, he stood here in this very spot saying, I want kids protected, and I want the list that they have created in 2004 to be disclosed publicly. His case was thrown out on the statute of limitations, and so his case was shut down, but his desire to protect kids hasn't been, and he's here to help us speak to that. Jim. It's Keenan.
Yep.
Come on.
Very good. My name is Jim Keenan, and I am a survivor of sexual abuse. And in my case, it was never about money. It was always about morality and doing the right thing. As parents, my mom and dad certainly didn't question when Father Tom would pick me up to go golfing or to go play racquetball. They had every bit of knowledge they had said it was a safe environment. Had they known what we found out later, this is a man who started abusing children before I was born. Our life path should have never, ever been crossed. It's of the most importance that this list gets released. It's the only way that the public will know who these men are. Knowledge is power. You can make the right decision if you have the right knowledge. Schoolhouse Rock got it right years ago on Saturday morning. Knowledge is power. We don't have the knowledge of who these priests are. When I talk to friends who continue to be Catholics, I ask them, how do they know? How do they know that priest who's running the camp that they're thinking about sending their son or daughter to isn't on that list? There's not an 800 number they can call and verify whether or not they're on the list. The list is private. I don't understand why an institution that prides itself on morality, that teaches right and wrong, continues to operate wrong. And they do it with apparently gusto. They spend a lot of time and effort to protect this list. We went all the way to the Supreme Court over 8 years of battling to protect children. I would like anyone who thinks about this issue to think about that statement. Should anyone have to fight for 8 years to protect a child from a priest? That doesn't make sense. There is no logic that can be put to that statement. And with that, I wish to say thank you to the legislation and the governor also for opening the door, because I think that's what's going to make this happen, is when more and more voices can be heard. It's a hard road to sue institutions like the church. It's not easy. They have deep pockets, they have resources, and they beat you down all the way. During my process, they tried to settle with me to make me be quiet, and I said no. And at one point, they tried to sue me back at one point to be quiet, and I said no. Our voice is the most powerful thing we have. So with that, I think this list needs to be released, and I think the church needs to come clean.
How many other Adamsons are on that list? And where are they now? And the only answer to that is known by the bishops. And that's why we have this imperative before us. The history of Adamson has been well documented. He had 15 different assignments in the Diocese of Winona and in the Archdiocese of St. Paul-Minneapolis. By our calculation, 14 of those transfers were on the heels of reports and concerns about his rape and molestation of children over a 25-year period. 14 of those transfers documented rape and molestation of children. How many more are there? And where are they right now? And what kids are they raping and molesting as we speak? Who knows? The Archbishop knows. The Bishop in Winona knows. And the bishops in Minnesota, none of whom have released these lists, know. This action is for nuisance against these defendants as well as negligence. Nuisance. That means by keeping this a secret, they pose a risk of public safety to our children by keeping this a secret and concealing this list and these offenders the same way they concealed the predatory conduct of Tom Adamson for 25 years, beginning in 1960 and continuing until the time when Jim was abused in 82 in the early 80s. And so we've also invited a former priest, Jim Fitzpatrick, to share what he learned about Adamson and when he learned it and what was done. And I think that speaks to the peril that is posed today, even though that goes back a few years. Jim Fitzpatrick, would you come up here? Jim Fitzpatrick is a former priest of the Diocese of Winona and came in contact with a then colleague priest, Tom Adamson. I'd like you to share with us a piece of that sordid saga.
Okay, thank you. I was an active priest in the Diocese of Winona from 1963 until 73. He said, Jim, I know that you know that we tried to send Tom Adamson to Guardian Angels. He said, if you feel that you need to go to the press or to the police, I grant you permission to do that. Feel free to do that. Well, a couple years before that lunch, there were two Franciscan nuns working at St. William's in Fridley. The pastor was abusing boys, and they went to Bishop Carlson to express their concern and ask that the pastor be moved. Bishop Carlson listened to their story, and at the end of it, he told the two sisters, if you go to the press or to the police, I will see that you will never work in this archdiocese or any archdiocese in the country. That tape was playing in the back of my mind, and at that particular lunch with Bishop Carlson, I felt I was being set up, and I left that lunch. I did not go to the police or to the press at that time.
Jim Fitzpatrick, when you say Robert Carlson, stand right here, would you please?
Oh, sure.
You're saying that was then Bishop Robert Carlson. That is the same Robert Carlson that is now the Archbishop of St. Paul of St. Louis, correct?
Correct.
And you did not report after that meeting. Why?
Basically, I was afraid of losing my job. I knew, I hadn't, again, that tape in the background, that threat to the two Franciscan sisters, and at that time, the Archdiocese still had employment at will as the employment policy, and so they could have got rid of me, no questions asked, the next day with no questions.
And Jim Fitzpatrick, you came forward after Jim Keenan had the courage to bring this suit and came to us to report this to us, did you not?
Yes.
And just to highlight a couple of things, in the 1960s, when you were a priest in Winona, you received credible reports that Adamson had abused multiple kids, and you brought that to the then Bishop Fitzgerald. And he basically said, mind your own business.
I'll take care of my priests.
And then he moved and allowed Adamson to have assignment after assignment after assignment, correct?
From Caledonia, this is unbelievable, folks. He moved him to Lourdes High School in Rochester, and he was made athletic director. Talk about putting the fox in the chicken coop.
And then he had 6 other assignments in Winona after reports, some of which are documented in the documents I have before you, in 5 different communities. And then it got too hot in Winona, so the bishop in Winona, then Bishop Waters, called Archbishop Roach in the Archdiocese of St. Paul-Minneapolis and said, will you take this priest right before Christmas? And they put him in a temporary assignment at St. Leo's, but then they placed him in St. Thomas Aquinas, where he continued to abuse other kids, and he abused this particular plaintiff, who's now 51 years old and been suffering in silence and secrecy and shame, but now had the courage to take this action, and he continued to abuse until we brought the first suit against Adamson in 1983, and that was the time at which he was abusing Jim Keenan. And it was sometime after that that Bishop Carlson came to you, in which you were silenced. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
And before that, Carlson had a conversation where they tried to put Adamson in Guardian Angels, and you pretty much vetoed that, but he ended up at Risen Savior.
Correct.
And that's where he abused Keenan.
Yes.
So we share this sordid saga with you because it demonstrates the peril that is before us. How many more Adamsons are there? How many more are on the list that were identified as 33 credibly accused offenders in 2004 in Archdiocese of St. Paul-Minneapolis, and 13 in Winona have been added since in the last decade? It was 33 and 13 10 years ago. How many are there now that are credibly accused? That means that they have been shown to have admitted having been abused kids, or there was enough evidence for the Archbishop and the Bishop to determine that it happened. and to put them on their list, their internal list. And so what this action does is seek an injunction. We're going to seek a court order. It was filed this morning, and we're going to seek a hearing as soon as is possible on behalf of this courageous survivor and all others like it, Jim, to get the court to order them to release these lists so the public knows where the peril is and who is at risk, and the children are better protected. And so to Jim Keenan, for your courage and resolution and the voice that you've demonstrated to this day, and Jim Fitzpatrick for your courage and wisdom in coming forward and being willing to bear witness to this. We're grateful, and to all the survivors who have had the courage to break the silence. We now invite you to know that the legislature and the governor have acted. The courthouse doors are open now to help bring hope, healing for the wounds of the past, and we now have a chance to join with you and keep your names private and your identities protected, to do something to protect other kids in the future. And that's why we've assembled here today, and that's why we filed this action, and that's why there is before us this imperative to force exposure, disclosure, and until there is exposure and disclosure, there can be no closure for Jim Keenan and all the other survivors who carry the wounds. Is that right, Jim?
I think you summed it up quite well.
Thank you. Any questions?
Jeff, can you talk about some of the challenges in bringing forward a case that's decades old?
The question is the challenges of bringing forth any case that is decades old. And the reality is that the burden of showing that it happened and that it was concealed, as in this case, and that there was negligence, is always on the one that brings the case. In this case, as an example, we have reams of documents that demonstrate, in the words of Bishop Waters, 5 different communities, 5 different families, heartbroken, have come to discover the source of our problems being Tom Adamson. There are documents and there is evidence, so that even though these crimes happened years ago, the concealment of them continues to this day, and the wounds are still alive. So the reason that the public policy behind the statute is so sound is that we can now reveal who the offenders are by suing them and exposing them in the community. We can also reveal those that chose to protect themselves and their reputations, and the offenders in them. And we have the burden of showing what we're claiming in these cases. And it has been our experience that when we have a chance to reveal the offenders, we have the chance to uncover the evidence that has been concealed for so long. Because sexual abuse is a crime of secrecy, and when institutions like the Archdiocese choose to protect the offender and their own reputation, we can get documents, and we can get testimony of other victims, and we can prove exactly what we're claiming here today.
What about the argument that was made in the past when you've tried a similar effort to make the list public, that the list in the judge in Ramsey County in 2009, it said, well, the list includes people who have never been convicted, and so there's concern about the damages to their names being made public.
The question is there was an argument made by the Archdiocese of St. Paul-Minneapolis that persuaded Judge Johnson in Ramsey County that the list should be kept private. And the argument posited by the Archdiocese, the Diocese of Winona, was that, well, these people haven't been convicted, so therefore we don't want to disclose their names. It's a specious argument. And it's specious because it is the Archbishop and the Bishop that has determined there's enough evidence to put them on the list. If there's enough evidence to put them on the list by their own admission, there's enough evidence to let the public know they pose a risk of harm. And so while the judge accepted that argument, we never have, and we never will. Because if we're going to think about this, what's the most important thing? Protecting the children first. And if there's enough evidence to believe that they committed the crime because they've admitted it, or there have enough victims that have come forward to prove it, to the satisfaction of the archbishop or the bishop, there's enough evidence to make it known to the public. Because it's much more important to protect those kids than it is the reputation of those offenders. And certainly that of the archdiocese. And for that reason, we now have another time, and this is another day. And we'll be making that very argument as soon as we can, because there's a fierce urgency of now around this law and this imperative to protect these kids.